Well, Nathan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So you run a podcast called How I Raised It. You've spoken to hundreds, I would think now, of founders who've raised. And so you've probably seen it all. Like you've probably heard all the stories. Obviously, I'm on the other side as a VC, kind of seeing people raise rounds, but you always get a lot more nuance when somebody shares the story of kind of like how they did it, what worked, what didn't work. Obviously, when people are actually pitching me, like they put on, their best face, everything's great, everything's working, which makes sense, which is what I would do. But you get to see all of it. And so what I thought we would do today is like kind of more of a tactical episode on just fundraising, right? And really go through not the 101s, like not the basic things everybody knows, like get warm intros, everybody knows, like, talk to a lot of investors, like create a great story. I mean, like these are high level things that everybody gets. And yet I can tell you firsthand, there are excellent fundraisers and there are average ones and there are bad ones. And sometimes they're great operators. So like whether people know the high level 101s or not, it's not like everybody's operating at 100%.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is product market fit.
Think back to the last few months, the last few years as you've been running the startup. How many different founders have helped you out? The reality is founders help each other out. That's just who founders are. They pay it forward. So help a founder out. Take literally 5 seconds, take your phone out of your pocket and hit 5 stars. It'd be interesting, like, given that you've heard so many stories, maybe start there with some specific, like, are there any stories you remember, and we'll tangent off from this, but like any specific fundraise stories that you remember hearing through your podcast that you still kind of think about because something about it was, exceptional?
That's such a hard question. I've done almost 300 of them now. So 300 unique stories, right? And it's kind of interesting for me because I had spent almost a decade and a half raising capital for startups and some venture funds. I worked in investment banking. My whole career had been raising capital. And I started doing this podcast. I thought I knew everything. I thought I knew it all. And I started doing this podcast and I learned so much, especially the first, call it 12 months of doing the podcast, of how companies raise capital, right? I learned a ton. There are many stories that leap out. Some stories people get funded by being clever, some by having a great background, and they're just naturally fundable because of their whole career. One of our customers and podcast guests called Brad Porter of Collaborative Robotics. He has like the ultimate career path where he worked at a couple big startups, then went on to run Amazon's robots program. He built like 600 robots. Then he goes out and starts his own robotics company, and he like had no trouble raising capital, right? Others are more, stories of scrappy founders who have to, get really creative and hustle like crazy to find investors. And then a few others. There's one, Isabel Kenyon, I believe her name was, that ran such a tight process that is really fascinating. Like it was just surgical, right? The way she had lined up investors, had an extremely tight time frame, was able to get everyone moving, had very specific things. I'll give one example. It was a scientific type of business, and she had a team of scientific advisors that she made available to investors who were interested, but she gave them, the investors, a very unique window or specific window. Like, I'm going to let you talk to my technical advisory board on these 3 dates. If you're pretty serious about putting down a term sheet, here are 3 dates. These are available. And she just ran it like a boss, right? That was kind of one I remember being pretty exciting. I could go on and on because, like I said, I've had 300 of these on the show and a lot of really unique ones. But yeah, I'll pause there.
And if you have to boil it down, like you mentioned, that over, especially the first year, like you learned so much, even though you were someone that was already doing this. So again, like beyond the kind of one-on-ones, like what are maybe some of the biggest learnings for you?
It's going to be a bit of a contradictory statement. There is kind of a right way and a wrong way, a lot of wrong ways to raise capital. There are some right ways, and there's a lot of common patterns of the successfully funded startups on the show, right? There's obviously a bias or selection issue here, and that everyone on the show was successful in raising capital. So we don't interview a lot of people who failed at it. What was kind of interesting though, there are a couple different right ways, but then there are actually a lot of really unique ways people raise money. Everything from, working the angel networks, syndicates, right? Like going out and pitching at a lot of different angel groups. Some people took that approach. Others, were very, very focused on like kind of building a big outbound cold email machine and just pumping through lots of names. Like I was kind of surprised how many sort of unique ways of raising capital we learned about and heard about.
So you've seen like hundreds of kind of successful fundraisers. Like how much of, the success of a fundraise has to do with how you run the actual fundraise, the process, how many conversations you have, how you tell the story, and all that optimization versus just the fact that you're fundable, like just the fact that you're a great founder or just the fact that you have kind of crazy traction. You know what I mean? Like how do you see that split?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say, making up numbers here, but probably 30% of the successfully funded folks had just such an awesome background and track record. Like they had worked, as number 5 at a scaling growth company before, and now they're going off and doing their own. So in those cases, it was all about who the founders were, and that's why investors were backing them. But the other 70% were, people who had come up with scrappy things. And I'm thinking of one off the top of my head. I think it was called Swimply. Like, I'll give you an example for this. It's a Airbnb for backyard pools, right? And the founder had come from like an Orthodox Jewish community, and he was supposed to become either a rabbi or a lawyer, right? That was his path, his family, but he wanted to be an entrepreneur instead. So completely wrong background, but he was out there hustling and getting people to pledge their backyard pools. Then he created this market for it and was able to get out there and raise capital for that. So 70% comes down to like the chutzpah, to continue with that idea, and just scrappiness of the founders. The other 30% was founder pedigree, if I had to like put some rough numbers around that.
But like in terms of the process itself, I guess the way I look at it is like the process itself, like we talk a lot about, let's say, going out and building a spreadsheet of investors that might be a fit, finding ways to get a warm intro, running a tight process, telling a good story, like all these things. And I guess my point, I'm just curious if you agree, because you've seen so many of these, that's like the 20%. Like all of that is the 20%. The 80% is what's the team? Like even if you run a great process, but you don't have a strong team, or you don't have any sort of traction, or your value prop, like the actual thing, like the actual business, you know what I mean? You're not going to get anywhere. And then vice versa is true as well. Like some people don't do any of this stuff. They don't run a tight process. They don't, reach out to dozens of investors. But yeah, like you look at who the founders are as an example, or what they build, the traction they have, and it's like, well, you don't need to really do anything. You're just going to fundraise because it's just the reality itself is so exceptional. So like, I just like curious if you think that way as well.
I'd almost flip that around a little bit, but I think you're on the right, you're totally correct. There has to be something fundable, right? Either the business is doing something really interesting and has great traction metrics and a big market, or the founders have such a exceptional pedigree, like the collaborative robotics guy I mentioned, that there has to be something fundable there. And then on top of that, most of these folks layered on a pretty good process. They ran fundraising the right way. They didn't kind of slap shot it and, kind of go off on a erratic approach to it. They were pretty disciplined in identifying the right investors, getting in touch with them, getting the intros, keeping the whole thing moving, getting momentum for the deal, updating people, and really generated that momentum. So I think you can possibly raise money if you have something fundable and don't run a really good process. But the converse is not true, right? If you don't have something fundable, you can't just run a great process and raise capital. Although, there's probably exceptions to that rule too.
I mean, by the way, like I just on a tangent, I think that's totally true. Like I think and especially the early rounds, like you're looking for believers. And oftentimes I find founders who resist the idea of speaking to a lot of investors are missing that point. Like, again, I think there's some areas that are so hot, or some pedigreed founders, like, repeat founders that have had material success that are just going to get funded because everybody wants that, right? Everybody wants to buy it. But for like 95% of even the fundable startups, like a lot of people just aren't going to get it. In fact, most people probably aren't going to get it because they don't get the industry, they don't get the value prop, maybe they're like timing, whatever it is, there's a million different things that could be happening. It is it's a game of numbers because of that. It's actually maybe less of a convincing exercise than a discovery exercise, as you put it.
I like that. That's another way to frame or phrase the same thing, right? It's more of a discovery exercise versus convincing. I like that a lot. I think kind of related to that is you got to find the right people who are looking for your type of deal, your industry, your stage, your geography in some cases, your other criteria they're looking for. But it's also a numbers game, right? You got to talk to a lot of people, especially at the early stages. I usually counsel the founders like on our platform to, have at least 100, probably more like 200 or even 300 target investors. And then, starting with that point and then even spending some more time in qualifying them, looking at what they're investing in, make sure they don't have a competitor, all that good stuff.
And then how do you get in front of them? Like, so you have this list of, let's say 150, like that part's not, I mean, with angels, it's actually, maybe I'll ask that even like if you're doing an angel round, like what have you found in terms of getting in front? Cause like VCs have websites, angels typically don't. These days, like where are you seeing founders either meeting or like sourcing enough angels to have like enough of these conversations?
Well, at the risk of being, self-promotional, obviously we have a database of that. We've got about 130,000 angels in Founder Suite. I'd say number 2, looking at LinkedIn, you go in and type the words angel investor into the search bar in LinkedIn. It's like over 100,000 results. And then, narrow that down by maybe your geography and second degree connections, things like that, right? And, usually when you do that exercise, you'll come up with a list of maybe 2,000 or so angels on LinkedIn, and then go in and look at their profiles and again, qualify them, look for clues that they do your deal. So LinkedIn's pretty good. Depending on where you live, angel groups can be good, right? Here in the Bay Area, I mean, there's probably a dozen different angel groups. There's life science angels, right? There's all these different angel groups. Now that's a whole different process because you usually have to apply and get someone to vet you and vouch for you, and it can take a while. But still, you can hit 60 angels in a room or on a Zoom call by working angel groups and angel networks. Sometimes also looking at similar companies, going in, plugging them into Crunchbase, seeing who funded them. You'll identify some names. Also keeping an eye on what I call the industry, trade blogs, Strictly VC and PE Hub and those type of things, seeing who's funding companies in your general space.
I find momentum it's really half the battle, like it maybe even more so. And we had a founder on recently who just raised crazy. You would love this story. He raised his seed round from General Catalyst in 6 days.
Wow.
And his Series A, $17 million Series A from A16 in 14 days. He's a first-time founder, has real traction, over $1 million in revenue now, didn't when he raised the seed round. But it was a lot of the momentum that he leveraged to get these things done that really made the round kind of go so fast. I find sometimes founders are like hesitant to do this. 2 things. One is sometimes founders don't want to spend the time fundraising. They're like, fundraising, like I just don't want it to be such a time suck. So they kind of do it on the side. And in reality, you take longer doing that. It actually takes a lot longer because you never really get momentum. Like momentum will get you around in a week, around in 2 weeks. Any investor that feels they have time isn't writing a check in a week or two. They're going to take their time because time is optionality. So why wouldn't they? So like you have to put them on their heels, and you can only do that by packing things, and you can only pack things if you really go all in. And the second thing is, I think there's something like that feels, I don't know, inorganic or something like that about specifically trying to drive FOMO, trying to drive momentum versus just, meeting investors, telling your story and hoping somebody like sees it, gets it and wants to fund it. But here's the thing. When it comes to early stage, especially seed or pre-seed, nobody knows. Like nobody knows who's going to be the big hit. People have different conviction levels, but like there's no real way to know. And so all the signaling becomes so important. And you as a founder, like you've got to have every single edge. So I think finding ways to pack your calendars so that you can have momentum and you can have those signals. And, if I talk to you today and like you could see it, how could I see it? Like, I try to move the meeting first thing, like somebody says, "Oh, you want to meet?" And I'm like, "Yeah, cool. How about in 2 weeks?" Like, "Oh, we're talking to 10 investors this week. Like, it'd be good if we talk early." Okay, cool, fine. So let's talk earlier. Then if I try to move the meeting for whatever reason, I can't because I have another investor meeting. Okay, cool. If I'm trying to book the follow-up meeting, same thing. Like I can tell the calendar's kind of packed. And then you start to see it in real like terms because, how many people are in the data room or how many term sheets you end up getting, or how quickly is your round filling up, at least in terms of like follow on, like all these things start to happen. And again, like if you have no interest, it doesn't matter. But if you're somewhat interested, this is the thing that's going to make you move fast as a VC.
Totally. I loved hearing it from the VC side because I'm always telling founders this concept and they don't always get it, right? But that's one of my quotes I tell founders all the time is like, investors can smell momentum, right? They can also smell if the deal does not have momentum or they can smell if it's gotten stale. So you want to go in smelling like momentum.
And then what about, the other thing that gets talked about a lot is, so let's say you've got these, so you find, typically you try to find as many kind of connections, warm interests as you can. Maybe just a question on that. Like, what do you find are the best source of those intros? And I understand, like, if you're new to the game, you're a first time founder, you don't have a network, like, it's going to be hard to get intros. And in some cases, you're going to have to go in cold, unfortunately. But like, to the extent that you can get intros, what are the best sources of intros to VCs or angel investors?
Sure. There's a hierarchy of intros. First is someone that's made that investor money in the past, right? The investor is going to take those intros all day long. I use this little story when I was raising our seed round for Founder Suite. My kid was in preschool at the time, and we had a dad's group. And one of the dads was a founder of a business that he had sold to Yahoo for like $240 million, something like that. He made a lot of people a lot of money. And he offered to make a couple intros for me. A guy named is Todd Sacerdote. And every intro he made, the investor responded within like 3 seconds. I'm not joking, right? It was the fastest response you've ever seen. And it was like but I only had a few of those, right? I had like 2 people that had that sort of level. So it's kind of like, all right, your best intro is someone that's made the money. Maybe second best is someone they've done deals with in the past, trade deals. Maybe it's an angel that's fed some deals to a VC or vice versa or whatever. Third best is, I would say, someone that the investor has invested in, right? A founder. And this is my little fun backdoor hack. I don't know if it's such a secret hack anymore. It used to be kind of below the radar, but reaching out to some founders, like if I've identified you as an investor, I really want to get to know because of your background, your track record, whatever.
And then what about, another common piece of advice, curious your thoughts on it or what you've seen here is like kind of as you go out and you reach out to these investors, you kind of stack rank them. And one thing I've heard, and again, like different people think different things, but like kind of this idea of you go after the ones that you actually don't think you really want, you go after first, you practice, and then the ones you really want, you go at the end with when you have momentum and, you've got your reps in. Have you seen that play out that way?
All the time. I even tell founders to do that. It's a little bit like, it takes me back to like, getting a job out of college. You got to get some interview practice in before, you get your interview with the dream job you want. So yeah, go in, get some practice pitches in with your third tier, maybe even second tier, and work your way to number one. Because those first few pitches are probably going to be a little rough. You just might not anticipate some of the questions they're going to ask. Maybe you don't have it quite. Your flow isn't quite there yet, right? I mean, your first, call it 5 to 10 pitches might be pretty rough, so I wouldn't waste them on your dream investor. And also, it's also good too, not only just getting your pitch reps in, but if some of those third tier, second tier investors are interested and they're, moving down the process, then it's always great to go. And when you're meeting your first tier investors, like, we have 3 firms circling. They're all talking about putting down term sheets. We're in, term discussions with them. no term sheets on the table yet, but we're in term discussions with a couple firms already. But you are my number one. Like I say that, hand on heart. So if this is interesting to you, I'd love to, that puts a little bit of pressure on your tier one to take some action if they're interested, right? So I think that's healthy for founders.
And then maybe one of the last questions, like, you go through these pitches. Some people are going to tell you no, maybe even on the call, they'll tell you no over email. That's easy enough, A few might like actually even say yes, especially if they're followers, be like, yeah, actually I'm in, just let me know kind of thing. And then you have like the real kind of meat of it, which is the ones in the middle that are somewhere between a no or yes. You just don't really know. Are they wasting your time? Are they just like too shy to say no, or like keeping that optionality? Or are they like potential yeses? Like, again, what are some specific things you've seen founders do at that part of the investment, process to turn those like unknowns into something? Ideally yeses, but like even a no, frankly, in my opinion, is sometimes better than an unknown, because an unknown just kind of is a waste of time.
Yeah, 100%. This is a great question because it's really getting into the nuances of fundraising. I'd say it goes back to that statement we talked about earlier about fundraising as a search for believers, right? That's what you really want to spend your time finding. You want to spend most of your time finding the believers. Then this other big category, like you're describing, are kind of the people in between. I wouldn't waste a lot of time. It's so hard as a founder because you want to convince people, you want to like turn them, you want to flip them into your court. But I would resist that urge. I would spend more time searching for the believers, but I would keep those middle category folks, the sort of, wishy-washy folks, non-committals. I keep them on your investor update distribution list. We didn't talk about this, but some of the founders that have done really well on our show are really religious and methodical about sending a monthly update about the business. Every month, they block it off on their calendar.
What have you seen that do, actually? Because that's interesting. I have mixed feelings about it. But I've also been on the receiving end of some good ones. So what have you seen come out of that?
It's that Mark Suster quote from years ago of investors invest in lines, not dots, right? It's just keeping investors updated. It's marketing 101, right? You're staying top of mind with investors. How do I stay in your brain, Pablo, when I'm raising money? You're one of my target investors. Sending you an update with interesting, exciting progress every month. So you can see this. Maybe you only spend 5 seconds skimming it. Maybe you're barely looking at it all. But if you're seeing like this company is actually making some interesting progress and getting some good deals, it's just going to create a little positive association in your brain. Also, anything else I can do is supplement that, right? If we can get some press coverage and TechCrunch or something else, we're like, oh, Nathan just sent me that update 2 days ago. That was kind of interesting. Now here he is, speaking at some TechCrunch event or something like that, or some, announcement there. Oh, look, another one of my contacts just pinged me offering to introduce Nathan, right? It's like, how many touch points can you create around each investor? And investor updates can be a nice one if you do it well. It doesn't have to be long. It's like company summary, key wins, KPIs, maybe a little summary of what's going to come up next month, new deals, new products, whatever. It can be really short, and short is good, but that's why, so back to the original question of what you do with this sort of non-committal folks, keeping them on your investor update list so they are seeing the progress. And of course, those investor updates should also contain a little bit of news about the fundraise, right? So if you get some term sheets or if you land a lead investor, obviously put that in there. And I have seen people like kind of tip those non-committals, especially when you get like maybe a solid lead investor, because sometimes people are just risk averse. They don't want to be the first ones into the woods, but they're happy to go into the woods when someone else is, chopping the path with the machete.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I like everybody wants to be in a perfect world, like the last money in. Why not? You had more time to think, you had more information. So it's kind of like, it's ideal from an investor perspective. And your job in a way as a founder is to like remove that option, right? Is to like make people feel like they can't wait for that perfect time. It's a bit of a now or never feeling, and when you have those feelings, people just tend to act quick. Let me ask you maybe another question. I know I said the other one was the last one, but there's two camps of thought. Two kind of camps I've seen, which is one is building relationships, and another one is kind of heads down until you raise, and then your heads down again. And so one of them is like, okay, and this is usually more for like, let's say Series A, right? So you raise a seed round, and some founders will say, okay, like I'm gonna raise my A in 12 to 18 months. So, you get some inbound interest often at those stages from investors. You also might do your own outbound type of work of finding 5, 10, 15 VC types that you think would be good. And then some founders are like, okay, I'm going to go and build like relationships with them. So I'll meet them, I'll talk to them once a quarter or whatever it is and give them an update. And others are like, no, I'm just going to not talk to anybody, any investor that comes to me. I'll just be like, not raising, or I won't even answer. And then when the time comes to fundraise, I'm going to run the tightest process ever. What have you seen work better, or when is one the right choice versus the other?
Yeah, I love these questions because it's one of these, like, there's not really a right answer, one or the other. They're two different strategies. My preference, and the thing I have seen work pretty well, I think when you're not, I do like the concept of flipping the switch. We're either fundraising or not, right? We're either on or not. Because you need to really devote, 12 hours a day for usually a couple months. I mean, you've had someone that mentioned, 14 days, right? But that's really, really rare.
That's an outlier, 100%.
100% outlier. So I like the concept of either on or not, but in between rounds, and this is something I tell our customers all the time, you might be getting some inbound stuff, fishing around, sniffing around. You might see investors at an event, conference, read about them on TechCrunch or Strictly VC, and like, oh, that guy, Pablo, sounds really interesting. What I would do is kind of passively collect these investors, even the inbound ones that, say they want to get to know you. Like, hey, we're not taking meetings right now, but I'd love to. I'm going to add you to my CRM if you're cool with that. I'm going to add you to my CRM. I'm going to add you to my company update distribution list so you can kind of keep up with the story. And so you're just kind of gently dripping and nurturing, dripping emails, dripping updates, and nurturing these folks in between rounds. So that's my favorite way to do it, because that doesn't take much time, and again, these updates, you should be sending them anyway, because you've raised some money, presumably. So you should be sending updates to the people who already funded you. So it's really just a function of adding a few more names to your list. And then in those updates, I actually like to say, a little bit about when you do plan to raise your next round, right? So as you're getting closer to it, if you're going to be raising, in Q2 of 2025, maybe in March, February, March, you start to put in there, hey, we're getting ready to raise our round in Q2, starting, in April. Let me know if you want early access to our pitch materials, things like that. So just a gentle nurture in between rounds. And then, of course, April rolls around, game on, you pull the switch and go full in. That's my favorite approach.
Perfect. Well, perfect time to end it. Nathan, thanks for jumping on the show, man. It's been great.
Fun to have me there. Fun to be here. Thank you for having me here. Appreciate it. I could talk about this stuff all day long, so I really, really enjoy it. Thank you.
You remember like the first person who told you about Bitcoin, the first person who told you about Uber? You want to be that person because being first is cool. So be a cool person and tell your founder friends. Send it to them on WhatsApp, put it in a WhatsApp group, put it on a Slack channel, let people know about the show, let people know about this episode. Don't let somebody else beat you to the punch and share it with your founder friends first. Remember what Ricky Bobby said. If you ain't first, you're last.